I'm David, and this is Connor. Welcome to Bootcamp of Life.
So from our last video, which is obviously very short, we have a lot to elaborate on. What points have you got to elaborate further on that video?
So I think the first thing we should speak about is the calculation, which is basically, we've spoken about this a few times, it's what drives us as human beings. It's how we make all our decisions. It drives everything about us. And this is the calculation of pain versus pleasure. You can't really say something is your dream or something is your hope or it's your ambition if it's not going to give you pleasure in some way. And I think that human beings have this internal calculation which is behind every single thing that they do, and that is pain versus pleasure. And you can look at it two ways. You can look at it like 2 meters with levels, and you say, okay, well, if I'm going to go study medicine, for example, it's going to be however many years of studying, and you put the pain here. Okay, so maybe you have friends partying, and that gives you a bit of pain, and you want to go out with them, you want to go traveling, and you know that you can't because you need to get this studying over and done with.
Yeah.
Maybe you don't like studying, you don't like the environment, and that adds to it. But then you have this dream of becoming a doctor, and for whatever reason it is, people have all different reasons for doing what they do, and if the pleasure overcomes the pain, they will make that decision. And I believe that we do this in all our actions in every single day. If something, we perceive it, of course, because we can't 100% always know, but if we perceive something to give us more pain than pleasure, then we simply will not do it.
Because you wouldn't have known, you wouldn't want to do it because you're going to go through misery, so you wouldn't want to, right?
Yeah, you have absolutely no motivation to do it.
Yeah.
There's no reason to. I mean, why would you? Why would someone do something that's going to give them pain?
You wouldn't.
You wouldn't, unless there's a perceived future estimate of more pleasure. So, for example, the studying,
Yeah.
For example, school. A lot of people don't like school, but they perceive a future pleasure from it, and also it can be pain versus pain. So it's like, okay, well, I don't like school, but if I drop out, what am I going to do? And so it's like the pain of dropping out is it's a calculation that we always do, and that's one way to look at it with the levels. And the other way to look at it is what actually drives us and what moves us. So you can look at it in more a horizontal view, which is we're here, pain comes at us from behind, and pleasure is something that we chase, So pain is something that will push us, If, for example, if we don't have money, it will push us to go out and work. If we're bored, it will push us to go out and do something, You can sit at home, maybe you enjoy clubbing, maybe you enjoy going to the movies, whatever it is, but maybe the pain of sitting at home is more than that, so that pushes you to go out. It's like, I don't really want to go out, but sitting at home is going to be worse, yeah. And that's another calculation that we do. Actually, a good example of this, it's from a TV show, Peaky Blinders. Do you watch?
Yeah.
Okay. So maybe you remember the scene where Tommy was asking, I think it was Charlie, I don't remember exactly who it was, but he was asking about his mum, and she had committed suicide. And basically, he said that Tommy's mum was saying, you have to move around or else it catches up with you. So when you analyze that, obviously, yes, it's from a TV show, but when you analyze it, there's a lot behind it. And it's exactly what we're talking about now. It's like, if you don't have something that you're chasing, then whatever's on this side, obviously you spoke about pain, pleasure. If you don't have something that you're going towards, then you stay, and then the pain will come and catch up to you.
Yeah.
And this is, again, one of the reasons why we have to move around and we have to be chasing something.
With the Peaky Blinders reference, obviously, he's referring to his son needs to move on. His son needs to keep pushing forward, if you see what I mean. He needs to carry on. Don't be haunted by the past, keep moving forward in that scenario, right? And that's like a very literal translation of that, if you see what I mean. It's literally, in their cases, they were also Romanies. They were actually traveling around in caravans. Like, it was metaphorical and literal.
Yeah.
And if you take it in the literal, in the metaphorical sense, on your scale, if pain is following you and you're chasing pleasure, you always have to be moving forward.
Yeah.
Because nobody wants their pain to consume them. Everybody will have something to aim for, albeit a dream or an idea.
Well, I think in this scenario, it's actually a really good one for Peaky Blinders, and maybe some people haven't watched it, they know what it's about, but it's about a gang, and a London gang back in 1918, I think. And obviously in a lifestyle like that, where you're committing a lot of crime and you're doing a lot of bad in this world, I think this example works really well with that, because if you were to stand still, if they were to stand still and look back at their lives, like, well, what have they done? They've caused a lot of pain, but for what? For money, for fame, for power. and because that calculation is like, okay, well, I might have lost family members, I've seen people die, I've gone through horrors, but I do it for this, right? So as soon as you stop and you understand what you have and you make a calculation, okay, this is what I have and this is what I went through, it doesn't match up. You wouldn't do it over again. You wouldn't replay that life. You wouldn't want to replay that kind of life. So you have to always chase something to keep you from the pain catching up. And this is also something that relates to hedonic adaptation, which we've spoken about in the past. And hedonic adaptation is basically like the cycle of desires, which is where you want something and then you get it, and then you don't want it anymore because you can't want something that you have. I think it's about reality versus illusion, because there's a lot of things that we chase that we feel will do something for us.
Yeah.
And then once we get them, we sort of have to look at the situation and say what's actually changed. And it goes back to seeking truth and delving into ourselves and understanding who we are and what makes us us. It's like, I'm David, right? Give me $100 million, who am I? I'm still David. Take away all my money, who am I? I'm still David. Now, a lot of people, they will change. As soon as you take things from them and give them things, they're going to change. And I think the whole point of it is that we have to always have a base reality of who we are that is not affected by outside things.
What level does that then tie in with like pain and pleasure on that point? How does that balance each other?
I think the hedonic adaptation is more to do with counteracting like how we've built this society, because we have all these perceptions of success, perceptions of happiness, perceptions of knowledge and wisdom, and we rank each other based on things that at the end of the day are not important. And they're fluid, they're subjective, and they're always changing. I mean, if you search up the definition of success, success is the accomplishment of an aim or purpose. So there's a few things you can look into this, like, okay, what defines accomplishment? And the aim is changing. I mean, if you have an aim and then you reach it, and then you need a new aim, so you're successful, and then as soon as you have a new goal, you're no longer successful.
No.
Or I mean, what if your accomplishment is, to have a happy family, and then one day when you're old you get divorced? So what? Your whole life was not a success? I mean, it's all based on perception. It's all subjective. It's all fluid. It's changing, and it does also create this environment where we are competing against each other. There's a very good example of when will a person be unhappy having $50 billion?
Not really. You can't imagine anyone in the world was given $50 billion that wouldn't be.
I can give you the answer. A person would be unhappy having $50 billion if he had 60 the day before.
Yeah, true. Yeah.
If someone makes 100,000 in a year and everyone else around him is making 80,000, well, fantastic. What about if everyone else made 150 in the same company? It's like all of a sudden the whole story's changed.
And the whole perception changes on it as well, yeah.
Everything's changed. This is where it gets interesting, right? Because you think about pleasure, which we've just gone over, and a hedonic adaptation comes into it. So it's like it's an impossible chase. You're seeking pleasure, but what pleasure can you really get that will satisfy you forever? It's all fleeting. It's all changing. If your pleasure is success, well, again, we just went through it. Success according to who? And it can change in a moment's time. So you want your whole life to be based upon something that can be taken away from you in a minute. And that's also what I was saying before. It's like I'm David, and I want to be David no matter what happens to me. I want my base of truth to be the same no matter what happens to me, because that's what truth is. It shouldn't be subjective. The other thing is, if we go back to the other side of things, the pleasure side, this is something that interested me a while ago, is that someone who says, you see this in sports maybe, I mean in all areas of life really, a person who has this mentality of it's never enough, Actually, there was a football. It doesn't really matter who, but he was saying that he left the club, and one of his reasons was that they had won so much, but they kept wanting to win more and more and more. And the responses to this was bad. The people weren't saying it's a good thing that he left. It was more like, oh, he has a weak mindset, because you should always want more. And I look at it like two ways. I look at it in two ways, right? And there are two ways to look at it. And number one is you look at the statement, it's never enough, and you can look at the enough part. Well, what is enough?
How do you define enough? Yeah.
It's never enough, right? It's never enough. Why? Because enough, according to who? I mean, if you look at the records in sports, if you look at success in all areas, how many albums are sold, movies sold, whatever it is in any area of life, There's always more. There's always someone doing more, and the record's always being broken. We're always improving, always succeeding, always doing more than we did before. So what is enough? It's never enough.
Never enough. No,
right?
If you in a football context, no club is ever going to be happy having won 100, 200. It's like we want to be the ones that get to 500. It's never enough.
Exactly.
I've scored 100 goals this season. Next season I need to score 200. There's never enough. You can there's always expansion.
And this is a mindset that will lead you to greatness, because you just keep going. Nothing will ever stop you. Now, a lot of people look at it like that, and it's like, oh, what an ambitious person. Then there's the second way to look at it, which is the word never. Don't focus on the word enough. Focus on the word never. If it's never enough, that means it's an endless chase. And that's a very scary notion, to be chasing something forever.
Indefinitely. Never with an answer, like, never with a result.
It's an endless chase. And that's the way that I've started to look at it. You know, because I see it too often that people will chase something their entire lives.
How would you interpret chasing something your entire life?
There's a quote: many men go fishing all their lives without knowing that it's not fish that they're after. And I think that happens to a lot of people, where they get into this chase and they don't look at what they're chasing. They just look at the chase, because that's the hedonic adaptation, is you get pleasure from something, and then what you want, and then you need or want something new. And now we go into the other side of it, which is, okay, we have this equation, and pain pushes us from behind and we seek pleasure. So we've already established that this seeking pleasure, this chase, is very, very difficult, for all the reasons that we just stated. But now we look at the other side of it, which is pain. Now, pain's the opposite of pleasure, because when you have pleasure, right, it then disappears and you chase something new. Pain is very different in that sense. Why? Because pain is a lot harder to process. Pleasure is something that you look back to. It's like, well, I had a very, very nice dinner with my girlfriend. It was amazing. She was really caring, really loving. It was a great conversation. And then you move on, and you can always have that amazing memory. But pain is something you look back at, something bad that happened to you, and you can't really process it a lot of times, because a lot of times we ignore pain. We try to push it away.
Yeah, it's always saying you push pain down, don't you?
Yeah.
So you're always like, you're trying to. You don't want to deal with it, you just want to suppress it, you just want to get rid of it.
It's also because people do not have understanding. And they don't want to understand, they like judging. And when you want to judge why someone did something to you or why something bad happened to you, it's very easy. It's like, because that person's a bad person. And then you move on. But you never get closure with that situation, because that's not good enough.
Yeah. As
human beings, we cannot settle for that. We cannot settle for bad things to happen to us, and then we just say, it's because that person is bad. It's because that person is selfish. Everyone has reasons for what they do. Everyone has reasons. We have to try and understand them. Because something led that. If we just say that person is bad, what do we do with that? What do we do with the person that's bad? What, we just throw them away? What made them bad? In your perception, they're bad. What made them bad?
Yeah.
What's the cause of that? Because if we tackle the cause, then we can make sure no one ever turns bad. But if we don't tackle the cause and we just call everyone bad and chuck them in prisons and just exclude them from society, well, what's going to happen with these people? And what's going to happen with the cause? The cause just gets left alone and we never ever fix it.
But they still end up being bad. So you've ended up in a situation where you have bad people, but no solution to why they're bad.
Exactly. And that's why I think that this calculation and the way that we move, pleasure, it's so easy with pleasure, and that's why we keep seeking, keep chasing it, because it happens, you get it, and then you move on, and you know you can chase it again. With pain, the calculation of pain is always beating the calculation of pleasure. Why? Because pain is so hard to process, so it lingers. If someone did something really bad to you, and you actually had like the right mentality about it, and you sat down and you really tried to understand them, which is the hardest thing to do when someone hurts you and you have to try and understand them and justify them. It's like becoming their lawyer. Yeah. Very, very difficult. But when you actually do that and you understand them, and by the way, this is where forgiveness comes in, because forgiveness is not a decision that you make. As much as people say, forgive me, forgiveness is not a decision that you make. Forgiveness is a result of understanding. When you understand why someone did something to you, you have no choice but to forgive them. And a lot of people say, I understand, but I still don't forgive. False. You don't understand. As long as you still have questions in your mind about why they did it, even if they're questions that you hide away, it's like, I understand why you did that, I forgive you, but then you go home and you're like, I can't believe you did that. Well, you can't believe it because you don't understand why you did it. So once you get the full understanding of why they did that, equals forgiveness. Yeah. There is no decision. It's straight away just dissolves into forgiveness.
Because you've already processed it, though. You've managed to do something that other people can't. If you can actually process why that person caused or went through the pain, if you see what I mean, you get to a solution.
Yeah.
And by understanding it, you can then forgive it, because you can't be, you can, again, like you said, you can say you forgive someone, but it doesn't mean anything unless you actually understood why they did what they did.
100%. Exactly right.
Like, so, I mean, that makes sense. It makes sense.
That you got it spot on, and that's why this equation becomes so much more complicated, because the pain always lingers, which means that, like, if you let's look at a scale of 0 to 100, right? Your pleasure could be 50 at a certain moment, and then it goes back down to 0, right? Maybe the memory stays, and you have 10.
Yeah.
But with pain, it always stays there, because we never process pain, and we never understand the people who hurt us. We never try to understand it, because to understand that would be to delve into truth, which would be to understand evil. And when you delve into truth and you understand evil, you understand evil. Yeah. And you understand that evil that exists in them could also exist in you under different circumstances. And that is a very difficult road to go down. It is a very difficult road to confront evil in its eyes, in its face. Very difficult road. And that's why people don't do it. So your level pains never go down to 0, whereas your pleasure level will go down to 0, and then you have to seek something else. So it's an unfair equation.
Because nobody's going to accept that they're capable of causing somebody that level of pain. Nobody is. But everybody can accept, if it's someone's birthday, you throw them a surprise birthday party. For the first, for half an hour, everyone's drinking and eating, everyone's happy, right? But then come tomorrow morning, you wake up, it's not your birthday anymore, so nobody's celebrating anything more. You're not getting any more pleasure from that. But let's say something happens on your birthday, but like something bad happens. You might have had the best party of your entire life, but then your pleasure drops straight down to 0, but your pain is still there. So you're saying that with pain, you physically can't really ever get rid of pain until you've accepted that you are capable of causing pain to another person.
Because it happens like this, right? If someone's hurt you, in order to process that, what you have to do is put yourself in their shoes, to imagine yourself in their position, which is like basically saying that you could have done that yourself, because you're putting yourself in their situations. You have to understand all the reasoning behind it, everything that led them to do that, and then you have to understand that you could have done that as well, which takes away the whole victim mentality. It's like you no longer have a right to be upset or angry or hurt, because you could have done it as well. And what that does is it forces you to process the pain, which is what we should do, but it's too painful at times, so people can't do it.
But it also forces you to process the pain in a way that is actually productive, rather than just accepting the pain. You're processing the pain, because you can accept the pain. Everybody accepts pain in their life. Like, you can accept this happened when I was this age, this happened this age, but the pain's still there. This is understanding what that pain has then done as a result of having that pain, what's happened. So everything gets broken down into, like you said, your pain can never hit 0, right? Nobody can ever physically live a life without a single bit of pain.
Well, let me ask you a question. If someone was to get down to a level of 0 pain, that means that anything that anyone ever did to them or to someone else...
Oh, that's true forgiveness then.
Yeah, that means they forgave everyone. Truly forgave. Because I'm sure there's people who say, I forgave everyone. I forgive all the people who caused wars. I forgive all the bad people in this world. Say, do you really? You have trouble forgiving Sally from the office who was gossiping about you.
Yeah, like,
you really forgive? You say forgive this, but do you understand them? Do you really understand them? The answer is no.
No, because if you can't have understood them, or the pain, or whatever the situation was, because you can't forgive them.
You have to confront the reality of what's happened. When someone does something bad, you have to confront the reality and understand them. Which is, it's such a difficult thing to do.
This doesn't just apply to individuals, though. This can also apply to, like, if you can get to a point where you can forgive pain in any form, like, well, forgive an individual, forgive a group of people, or forgive whatever, you realize that you can eradicate a lot of your own pain, because 100%. you've been able to say completely truthfully that you've forgiven that person, or you've forgiven that group of people, or you've forgiven that instance.
Do you know what else it is? A lot of people do things and never apologize for it. Yeah. So in that scenario, if you have pain that's come from a person who's not sorry, he's not explained himself, do you know how difficult it is in that scenario to then put yourself in their shoes when they've not even given you any hint? I mean, let's look at like the people who have done the worst things in this world. If you look at Adolf Hitler, right?
Mao, these are all people that are
Yeah.
inherently, you know, evil.
Yeah, if you look at these
Say
people,
that, yeah.
if you look at these people, did they ever show regret? Did they ever explain themselves?
No.
So how can you live day to day not understanding this kind of evil?
Yeah.
Do you understand? Like, there's a lot of people that have done bad things. They've never explained themselves, never said sorry. So it's like you almost have to go without any invitation, put yourself in their shoes, try to understand them in order to be able to move on with it fully.
But it's also hard to forgive somebody who shows no remorse for what they've done. If you see what I mean, like it's much easier for
It's
me.
harder to understand them.
Much harder to understand, because if you apologize to me, let's say you back into my car on the way out and you get out the car, you're going to be like, "I'm so sorry," but you're going to be sorry, aren't you? You are, and I'll look at you and look in your face and you'll be like, "I'm sorry," like that. But if someone shows no remorse, you might get out of the car and start shouting, "Why's your car in the way?" That person shows no remorse, so you can't forgive that person 20 minutes later. You're going to constantly be thinking, "He reversed into my car. It's his fault." You're never going to forgive them because you don't understand. Maybe the camera wasn't working, maybe the sensor wasn't working. But as soon as you understand the problem, but also understand that the person, their intentions behind it, if you see what I mean, it's much easier to forgive then. But it's possible to forgive then, if you see what I mean. It's you have the opportunity to forgive.
So when you take all of these things together and you look at the pain side, which we've spoken about, forgiveness and understanding, which is a really difficult side. It's a really difficult side to tackle. And then you look at the pleasure side, which is an endless chase, and it's hedonic adaptation, and again, everything we've just discussed. Yeah. You see how it becomes this equation that you can't get around. It will control you for the rest of your life. And that's why I believe that people desire pleasure. They seek pleasure and they reject pain. That's all that they do their entire lives. Every decision they make, every action they make. If I'm sitting like this, it's because I'm more comfortable like this. If I'm sitting like this, it's because I'm more comfortable like this. We just seek pleasure, reject pain. And that drives us. Now, the problem with this equation, the big problem with this equation, and this is where we delve into the last video and what we were trying to get across, is that this equation is my equation. I seek pleasure and I reject pain. Whose pleasure do I seek? Whose pain do I reject? I seek my own pleasure and I reject my own pain. Yeah. Right? If right now you put your hand on a nail, you're hurting. It's your pain. It's not my pain.
Yeah.
So it's a flaw. And this takes us into, well, yeah, people will say, okay, but you see him hurting, it's going to affect you. Yes, very good. And that takes us into the next stage, which is empathy. Now, empathy is a flawed concept. And I'll explain why. Because empathy, I mean, we speak about empathy, it's, I don't think empathy is a bad thing. I think empathy is a very good thing. But I think the way that we view it stops people from employing empathy. And the reason why is because we see empathy as like this selfless altruistic trait, which is, I'm able to understand how you feel. Well, how do we employ empathy? We employ empathy by me putting myself in your shoes. I have to imagine myself in your shoes. That's the only way. If you think about any single time in your entire life that you've employed empathy, you've imagined yourself in their shoes. Because otherwise, you cannot feel a thing.
No.
You can feel nothing. Because there's nothing inside of us, nothing that allows us to feel what someone else is feeling. The only way we do it is by imagining ourselves in that situation. Well, that's a pretty flawed thing, isn't it?
Yeah, because you can't realistically imagine yourself in another person's situation. You can think that you can relate to the physical act, if you see what I mean. You don't actually know what that person was physically feeling. You can say that person was feeling sad.
Yeah.
You can't actually experience what they were experiencing. You can't.
Well, try to think about it like this. There's a lot of people, like, you look at the people that do dedicate their lives to a cause. Ask them, go look at interviews. What led them to that cause? A lot of the time, they went through it.
Yeah.
If I had anxiety as a child, I'm going to try to help people with anxiety. If I had depression as a child, I'll help people with depression. If I was starving as a child, I'll try to help people with food. You see this a lot with celebrities, with people in power. They help people in a specific cause that they've gone through. Why? Because they understand it. They can employ empathy because they see themselves in someone else. It's like seeing if you were starving as a child and you see someone else starving, it brings up those memories.
Yeah, you're gonna try and do something to make sure they don't feel as bad as you felt.
Exactly.
Give them a sandwich and hope they feel better.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, look at, again, just an example, but COVID, right? COVID could have affected your family terribly. And for someone else, COVID could have not really done much except for affect his work. Now, one person will view COVID as a disturbance. Another person will view COVID as an absolute tragedy.
Yeah.
Does that affect the reality of COVID?
No, not at all.
If you take all
COVID's
the pain,
still COVID, yeah.
all the pain that came from COVID for the whole world, does it change?
No, COVID's still the same.
Still the same.
Still the same.
Just because one person viewed it as a disturbance, as a mind disturbance, and some person viewed it as a major tragedy, it doesn't change the reality of it. And that's what we have to understand. We have to understand that our perception is misleading. Just because you live a good life does not mean that life is good. Just because you view the world as a good world does not mean that the world is good. I mean, go tell the victims, I mean, if you could bring back the victims of World War II and tell them, come back to life, now take, as again, the equation, take all the pain that you've ever experienced. We're going to bring you back to life, along with all the pain that you experienced. What can we give them in this world right now that would then give them a reason to do that? What pleasure? What pleasure?
You couldn't. You
give them $100 billion?
Yeah.
No, thank you. I prefer not to go through it again.
Yeah, like you.
Give them what?
There's nothing that would want them. They physically. You couldn't offer them anything.
You couldn't offer them a single thing, and that's what misleads us as a generation, as a race. Is that we don't view the world in an objective manner. We just view it how we view it in our own perception because we're flawed. We're simply flawed, and that's the reality, and we have to accept it. Because before you can come up with a solution, you have to accept the problem. Again, just because you have a nice life does not mean that life is nice as a whole. If you could take the whole pain of the entire world versus the whole pleasure, where would it be?
I would rank pain higher than pleasure.
Of course.
Considerably.
Of course,
higher.
we just went through it. How can you possibly tell a victim of World War II to go through everything they just went through? What can you give them?
There's nothing that would balance that.
And I hope people watching this video can actually try think for themselves and come up with something that you could offer these people that went through horrors. What can you offer them to make them go through it again? So just because you didn't go through it, then the world is a lovely place, the world is a beautiful place, we don't have to do anything, I'm going to live my life? Why? Because you didn't go through it?
Yeah.
And then someone else will go through it again in the future? Why? Because we haven't fixed the root cause of it.
So would you say if there was a way to fix the root, right, so that everybody was able to use the word empathy. We'll use the word empathy because it's a well-known word. If you see what I mean. If you were able to get to an empathetic level where you were able to forgive completely, right? Even the people who suffered horrors throughout World War II, throughout any conflict, throughout anything that caused pain, pretty much. If their mindset was able to be changed to a forgiving one, you wouldn't want to put yourself in that situation again, regardless of what someone offered you. You physically wouldn't want to.
Yeah.
Because that's when, like you said, pleasure can hit zero, right? Pleasure can really hit zero. And if you're talking about, World War II, pleasure can really hit zero. And pain can reach...
And it will stay.
...unimaginable levels. And nothing can change that.
Yeah.
Nothing can change that. You try to tell somebody now, like you said, bring somebody back and go, I'm going to give you the world, but you have to go through it again.
Yeah.
You have to go through all of that again, where your pleasure is at zero and your pain is sky high. No human being is going to say yes.
So how do you fix that? Well, you have to look at it and say we can't make it better. We can't make it better for the person. The most we can do is make sure it never happens again. Well, then how do we do that? Look at the root, look at the cause, look at the people that did it. And in order to fix something, you have to understand it. It's like you bring someone to fix your air conditioner, they have to understand about air conditioners. You bring someone who understands about computers, they might not understand the air conditioner, they might not know how to fix it. So what does a person need to understand in order to fix people that did these horrors? You have to understand evil.
You have to understand.
You have to understand evil.
Okay.
You have to put yourself in the shoes of evil. You have to confront it like no one has ever done before. Sounds impossible, right? No one wants to go there. No one wants to understand. In fact, you could get criticism for saying such a thing, for saying I want to understand Adolf Hitler. I want to understand exactly what went through him.
But that's the only way you're ever going to be able to understand the
to sympathize with him.
Yeah,
it's the only way. You have to put. That's what sympathy is. No, putting yourself in someone else's shoes.
But that's the thing. If you're actually able to do that, again,
if you're able to do that, you're the only person that stands a chance of fixing him if he comes back. If another person exactly like him comes back, who's going to have the biggest chance of fixing him? Someone who understands him 100%.
Fully understands him. Yeah. So by understanding the root of any problem, not just evil, but understanding the root of whatever the problem is going to lead you to a position where you can actually understand. Okay.
I'll give another example, right? I'll give another example because I want to really get people to understand, get everyone to understand this inherent flaw in us. And another example is you're walking down the street and you see a homeless person, right? So you give him money, walk away. Good thing, yes?
Yeah, on the scale, yeah.
Now, let's look at the situation, right? If you didn't give him money, what would you feel?
You'd feel like you'd let the person down. You'd feel bad.
He's looking at you, you're looking at him.
You'd feel really bad about it, yeah.
Pain goes up.
That's not your pain though, is it?
It's your pain.
But it's your pain for his pain, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, we'll get to that. But it's your pain. You walk past him like, I didn't give him food, and now I feel bad. I'm not a good person. A good person would have given him. I do have change. I should have given.
Yeah.
I feel bad about it. And I'll tell you why you can't say like, it's about his pain. Why? Because if you hadn't walked past him, does he still exist?
He's still there.
Still starving?
Yeah.
Did you wake up and say, I'm going to go look for a homeless person to give money to? Or did you walk past him and your calculation of, I give, I don't give, that led you to have to make that decision?
Well, you feel guilty then, don't you?
Yeah.
You walk away and you feel guilt that you didn't do it. But you didn't seek it out either.
So now this is going to seem fairly obvious, right? So you walk past a homeless person and you make your internal calculation and you give or you don't give. Now, if he was somewhere else and you hadn't seen him, would you have given? It's physically impossible.
I can't have, yeah.
It's physically impossible. So that what this simple, obvious question does is it shows you this, there is no correlation between what he is feeling and what you are feeling. It is only because he was next to you. It was because your perception of him, you seeing him, then entered your calculation. It's not about him. If he was on the other side of the street and you didn't see him, you wouldn't have given to him. So it's not about him at all. It's about you, because it's actually impossible to include someone else in your equation. And that is basically this inherent flaw, is that we are unable to include someone else's pain and pleasure in our equation, only in the way that it affects us. Only in the way. And that can be guilt. It can also be the other side of it, which is joy. You can take joy from someone else's joy. And the thing about this, I think it's very important, because again, it's the same thing with empathy. We have a false view of altruism, because we try to be altruistic, but then you feel good for doing something, and then you're like, okay, maybe that wasn't altruistic. The reality of altruism is that we are people, we are human beings who must seek pleasure. We cannot live a life without pleasure. You know, even if I was to offer you everything you need to survive, money, everything, you never have to work another day in your life. You can have a family, you can have everything you've ever wanted, but you have to sit at home all day. You're going to go crazy after a while. Yeah. You need something. You need a constant pleasure. You need constant pleasure, constant chase. So we're a race that basically lives off of this equation. We need pleasure. So once we've accepted that we need pleasure, we can get away from this false view of we can be altruistic, we can be good. And what we can get to is, you know what? I do need pleasure, but I'm going to take my pleasure from you, from you, from you, from you. You have a problem? I'm going to help you, and I'm going to take pleasure from it. And when I help you and you're happy, I'm going to be happy as well. Okay, so it is about your pleasure. You don't delude yourself that you're doing this 100% for them. You understand that you also need to receive pleasure from it.
But on the same side as that as well, would you also have to say that if they were to fail, you would also feel their pain?
100%.
So you're with them so you have to be with them on both sides. If
you employ 100% true empathy, which is to include yourself in them. Include yourself in them. Everything they go through, you go through. And if we all did this, then guess what? You're taking care of a lot of people, but a lot of people are taking care of you. We wake up each day, who needs help today? It's not about us. Who needs help today? And then we find out that this amount of people need help today, and we go help them.
But then
And that gives us joy.
But it would also mean that the people you would help would then want to go out and help as well. So you
'Cause
end
it
up
works.
with an exponential growth of people
It
that
works.
understand that what they are doing is for their own pain, for their own pleasure, and by understanding that they understand that, they're able to help as many
Exactly.
people as possible.
Do you know what it is? Accept your egoism, but change it for egoism for myself to egoism for others. I use my ego, but I use it with others. Do you understand?
Yeah. So let's say you're helping somebody, right? In this scenario, right? In this particular scenario that you were talking about, right? You will feel joy when they succeed, right? But it's acknowledged. I'm just going to break it down just so if I know that I understood it, right? So you are going to seek pleasure from the fact that you succeeded in doing something, right? But I know I am also going to seek pleasure from that because I'm happy that you've succeeded, right? And if you fail, I'm going to be miserable because you failed as well. So that is true empathy.
It's switching your view of it, because like I think right now what we have is a wall between us and altruism, and there's this debate about altruism and
How would you
and
define
can you
altruism,
be,
by the way? Like,
well,
what would
altruism,
be
I
your-
believe that people right now define as doing something without any gain. Let's actually search it up. Let's find out.
So
Altruism meaning. Okay, disinterested and selfless concern for the well-being of others. If the whole world saw this video, we would change this definition, because it's impossible. It's impossible. It's completely impossible. You cannot do that. You cannot have selfless concern. You cannot be disinterested in your own joy. You can't. A life trying to be selfless is a life without joy, and no one wants to live like that. I don't care how good you think you are. I don't care who's been the best person that's ever existed. You cannot. You need joy. You need something to wake up to.
Seek happiness.
You have to seek happiness.
You have to. It's impossible. You can't live a life without finding even some small minor thing that makes you happy.
You have to accept that you require joy and pleasure as a human being, but at least take that joy from helping others.
Yeah. By you helping others, others will want to help others, and others will want to help others, and others will want to help others, until eventually you end up in a situation where nobody's really thinking about it anymore.
I want to leave you and everyone else with this, and I think this sums it up beautifully with everything that we've spoken about. Look at the calculation that we have. Now, whatever you do when you're helping someone else, you're losing something. It's inevitable. You're losing time, you're losing energy, you're losing money, you're losing resources. Whatever you're doing to help someone, you lose something. Now, let's look at someone who tries to be altruistic. What does that mean for pleasure? Because we just read it on Google. It's disinterested and selfless concern. So it's not about you. So there's nothing, no pleasure. So you're asking someone to go completely against their nature. Pain?
Completely against, with pain.
No pleasure. This definition of altruism is a wall that stops us from making this decision. So it's like, okay, I'm going to lose something, I'm going to help someone, it's going to be selfless, it's going to be altruistic, I'm going to do it. Impossible. How do you do it? You can't do it. But if we accept, wait, altruism is impossible because we have to receive pleasure. I'm going to lose all this, but I'm going to help this person, I'm going to take pleasure for it. Remove that wall. Don't say this is selfless, because a selfless altruistic action is impossible. It's against the nature.
Yeah.
If you remove this definition and you understand it's not selfless, I am concerned with myself, all of a sudden you allow yourself to receive joy from it, and then these actions that were looked at as altruistic beforehand, the same action of helping, but when you remove this wall of altruism, which does not allow you to actually take that action, all of a sudden you can take it. You can receive joy from it. You can be happy doing it. You understand that you're doing this also for yourself, and all of a sudden the world becomes a much, much better place.
Unless you understand that, you can't physically move forward as a balanced person. Do you see what I mean? And having that balance between good, between bad, between pleasure, between pain. Like,
the only thing stopping us from a utopia is this inherent flaw that we have to accept, because we have like the world as we see it now, which we all know is a world where people are struggling and they're suffering, and this utopian world of everyone has everything. But in this utopian world, we're like, what if we could all love each other more than we love ourselves? And it's like this unrealistic altruism, and that's why we've never achieved it. Because if we could achieve it, we would achieve it. Why? Because this world has the most pleasure, and we love pleasure, so we would have achieved it. Why can we not achieve this utopian world? It's because it is covered in altruism, which can't exist. As soon as we get rid of this unrealistic expectation that we're all going to be selfless people, and we understand that we need pleasure, but we receive this pleasure from helping each other, that's how we move forward.